Well, first of all, I'll give you context of why I chose him. I grew up in Philadelphia, and I was just a deep music appreciator as a young person. And I felt there was a certain point in my life where I moved out of my parents' house and I was living in the city. This is in like the mid 90s, so I discovered record stores, and my whole sort of musical knowledge and world kind of opened up, and I discovered all this stuff, and I had this desire to just really explore everything, and it was all accessible to me. And I grew up playing music. I was in hardcore bands. That stuff really, the music didn't really speak to me until I kind of started digging a little deeper, listening to music from around the world, learning about jazz, the history of different kinds of music. I moved into this place and these guys had huge record collections. So every day I would just play records. And also in Philadelphia is where the Sun Ra Arkestra lived, and they still live there. They've lived there since the 60s. I knew who they were. I had heard some of his music. I didn't really quite understand or get it. And they were playing this concert at a kind of community center, which was within 15 minutes walk from where I was living. And I had never seen anything like it, and it was the most impactful and powerful concert that I had ever seen, and one of the most I've seen since, in my whole life. After that, I just was so interested in that community and how they put out their own music. I mean, I was already interested in labels that were making their own music, but these guys had been doing it since the 60s. They were making their own artwork, they were pressing up the vinyl, and they were driving boxes of records around in vans and meeting people at airports. Is a really incredible legacy and story. I would see these musicians around Philadelphia, and I befriended a bunch of them, and just to hear their stories and their whole trajectory through their musical lives were just really incredible. But at the same time, these guys are living in a very different reality, and they have such a deep commitment to their music. They're not making any money. They're playing on the street and the cops are coming and bothering them. Meanwhile, this is a guy who's played on Motown records and has, toured the world with Stevie Wonder. The way their stability in life and their charisma and it was like very joyous music. And also the output, the amount of music that he made, and the fact that they're still touring. It's really amazing. And I felt, when you asked me the question, I sort of felt like Sun Ra and his group should be put into this sort of canon of American history, and more people should know and understand what kind of challenges that this band faced throughout the civil rights, even before this time in the 40s and 50s. I mean, this is a person who was so ahead of his time. I mean, his saxophone player, John Gilmore, he could have been a huge star, and he was. He played in a lot of different bands before he committed himself to Sun Ra's band for the rest of his life. But this is a guy who John Coltrane was going and watching and taking cues from. These people are very, very important as far as particularly jazz, but just music in general. They were kind of existing in this sub level of society. People just thought of them as crazy. They didn't understand the whole story and the whole spectrum of his art and his poetry and his philosophy. And I think it's interesting now. I think people are understanding it a little more. It's 50, 60 years later. People are kind of coming around to his knowledge of history and also his sort of philosophy of otherness within art and in music.